Welcome to another episode of Exploring Prosperity. Today's episode takes us into the heart of one of the most important constitutional questions of our time: how and why the presidency has amassed so much power, and what it means for the future of American democracy. I'm honored to welcome Professor Bruce Ackerman, Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University, author of 19 books, and who is widely recognized as one of the most influential constitutional scholars of our time. His work has reshaped how we understand constitutional change, democratic legitimacy, and the living nature of the U.S. Constitution. His 2010 book, The Decline and Fall of the American Republic, warned that ever-increasing executive branch dominance over the past century threatens to upset the entire system the founders envisioned. We'll talk about the historical roots of this problem, what's changed in recent decades, and whether the forces now in motion will lead to reform or push us towards something more destabilizing. Well, let's dive right in. Professor Ackerman, let's start with this. When people talk about today's political dysfunction, they often act like we're in uncharted territory. But is this really true? Have there been earlier moments in American history where the system was under this kind of strain?
Well, before I begin, I do want to emphasize this is not the first constitutional crisis we've had in the history of the Republic. Uh, the Civil War, after all, was the most gripping, shattering crisis, but there have been many others. Um, and this, the, and I'm as you suggest, going to be trying to provide a diagnosis of the different dimensions of our problem so that you can think through whether my proposals for reform make sense, because they may not. But the important thing is for me to provoke other people to engage in this conversation, which is going to endure for several years and then many more.
So, if we faced major constitutional challenges before, what makes this moment different? What's changed about the country or the people that might affect how we respond?
So the crucial resource we have is best understood by contrasting it with the 1960s, when we witnessed one of the last great transformations in our constitutional uh, uh, principles. At the time, uh, we were in the head, we were the leading country in higher education in the world, which is no longer the case, I should say. But at that time, 4% of blacks and 8% of whites had graduated college, and 50% of all Americans were high school dropouts. Uh, so unless you were very lucky, you and did extremely well on the College Board tests, and of course that was greatly assisted if your parents were not super wealthy, but nonetheless wealthy enough to help you out. Most people were not in a position actually to assess uh, the predicament of Black people. Uh, what they had inspiring images provided by Martin Luther King and things of this kind, and calls, emotional calls. But if at the core of our democratic life, which was a central thesis of the Federalist Papers, uh, uh, it was that we, as voters and participants, as citizens, should reason together, not merely act in a, yes, I win, you lose way. That we couldn't really expect the dominant group to reason together when they half of the people were high school dropouts.
This show is being brought to you by our sponsor, Trueflation. Professional investors and economists, and probably any casual observers, know that government inflation statistics are only an approximation of what real inflation is. Not only that, but the government has a conflict of interest because high inflation can be so damaging to the economy, the deficit, and our $34 trillion in debt. Trueflation collects over 13 million pricing data points. Most are updated daily to reveal inflation with precision for asset managers, governments, companies, and the general public. Check them out at trueflation.com. We're proud to be sponsored by Foundation. They've created Passport, one of the top-rated Bitcoin hardware wallets, proudly made in the USA. It's fully open source and air-gapped, meaning your Bitcoin stays completely offline and secure. The shocking Bybit exchange hack shows why holding some Bitcoin offline diversifies risk. Now they're launching Passport Prime, your all-in-one solution for not only Bitcoin, but all passwords and 2FA security. Head to foundation.xyz to secure your digital future.
Today, if you, and these are solid numbers, I'd be more than happy to share the sources with anybody who emails me. And by the way, feel free to email me at bruce.ackerman@yale.edu, and I'll respond. Maybe not immediately, but I'll respond. The key point is that at the present time, if by the age of 25, if you were born in the year 2000, to make things easy, by 2025, 50% of whites, 50, and 38% of blacks will have graduated college. 10% are high school dropouts. Group between 10 and 50, or 438, and percentage-wise, the increase in black education is greater than the increase in white education, from 8 to 50, but 4 to 38. You can do the mathematics for yourself. The key point is also that by the age of 28, of the 50 of the people who are graduates of college, 15% of blacks and whites, more or less equal, will have gotten a postgraduate degree. So there's 15% of Americans, 15% of Americans who could actually read the Heritage Foundation report 2025 or some future electoral report by both the Democrats and Republican parties in 2029 for the presidential election in 2029. We assess it in a professional fashion. At the same time, the group between the 10% dropouts and the 50% who have graduated college, the majority of these people have gone to community college and have graduated 2-year degrees. So they too, characteristically, these community colleges emphasize correctly tech studies so that people can actually get good jobs in the 21st century. But that also permits them to analyze critically the kinds of arguments that are being presented. So here we have this remarkably enlightened electorate. And in Europe, the same. And in Japan, the same. And in other countries, they're catching up. In India, there's 20% who are now college graduates, which is a lot better than it was near zero at the time that the Congress Party gained independence for India in 1948. So we have here the most enlightened uh, 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 electorate in the history of the world. Why are they voting for uh, 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 people who self-consciously are urging a radical transformation of our the system? That's the question that is in the back of my mind, but in the forefront, it is the key. I hope of this conversation is to understand that while Donald Trump, to his credit, I think, has elaborated for the first 3 months an incredibly ambitious program uh, with many different components. What I want to invite you to do, or I encourage Bob to help me do, is to uh, uh, see that different dimensions of the program uh, have different uh, uh, constitutional and implications.
Let's talk about one of Trump's big early moves, his use of tariffs. Some senators, like Rand Paul of Kentucky, argue that the president doesn't have the constitutional authority to change tariffs unilaterally. But others argue that Congress has passed laws that do give him statutory authority, which many politicians criticize as having handed over too much power to the executive. Is this true?
Does the president, does President Trump have the authority under the existing legal scheme of statutes and constitutional provisions to embark on his tariff policy, which he has made a central point in the 3 months. He's done many other things, which we'll be talking about. And I want to say that the answer is yes. He does have the statutory authority. Presidents do have a great deal of statutory authority to adapt tariffs to changing circumstances. To be sure, when this issue will be litigated, is being litigated right now, there will be counter arguments on both sides, and we don't have to get into this too deeply, because the key point is that uh, uh, the courts will have this is a sort of standard problem that courts in the United States deal with every year. There are arguments on one side that are plausible. There are arguments on the other side that are plausible. And what is the right decision? And we'll have to, these cases are now being litigated in lots of different circuits. But I don't think that there will be this emphatic, coherent no. That and Even though we see that, as Trump himself and others recognize, that there are going to be short-term costs for this. He believes, and some people believe, and some people don't, uh, long-term gains. This is really a standard a political problem that different political parties present different views. Obviously, the Biden administration had a different view on tariff policy than the Trump administration does. Who should win? Well, says the courts, That's a good question, but the balance of opinion will be to support this long run tendency to support uh, Trump's exercise of policy making adaptation.
If the president has statutory authority to impose tariffs, does he have authority to refuse to spend money on independent agencies like USAID or the Fed?
In contrast, and this is why I begin there, the President Trump's challenge to independent agencies, uh, like the Federal Reserve Board, like USAID, which has already gone up to the Supreme Court, come back, and will for sure be a central case that the Supreme Court will decide probably in the fall, not in the spring. It's too quick, and the issues are really fundamental uh, because at the present time there are 40 independent agencies in the functioning, from the CIA. The CIA is by statute created in 1947. The CIA cannot spy on Americans in the United States. Uh, they it's complicated whether they can spy on Americans if they're in Europe, but they cannot in the United States. And the and this point there's was uh, uh, at the center of one of the great uh, tests of presidential legitimacy of the 20th century, which was Richard Nixon's Watergate uh, tragedy, because that's what it was, where it was revealed that Nixon is running for reelection, which he won with a decisive majority, 57-43, one of the biggest majorities ever in the history of the United States. This is really quite remarkable. But he succumbed to the internet temptation of the 1970s, which is nothing compared to today. But it was possible for the CIA to spy on the Democratic headquarters so that he could find out what the opposition was planning, and he could be even more effective. He would have won by a landslide either way, because he had really done decisive work in the first term, in which he won by a very narrow majority. But the second time around, he won by a decisive majority. When this was revealed, um, the House of Representatives, uh, by overwhelming votes, approved, Democrat and Republican, even though he had a very strong Republican majority. Uh, uh, he approved his impeachment, bill of impeachment, which is readily available. And Article 2 of this bill of impeachment explicitly stated uh, that his assault on the independence of the CIA constituted a high crime and misdemeanor. Uh, and 16 years later, when Nixon, when confronting this, he didn't know whether the Senate would actually go along, because you need 2/3 majority of the Senate to actually remove him from office. But he decided, all things considered, that he wasn't going to accept any more humiliation, and he resigned so that Gerald Ford could take over as a thoughtful centrist. 16 years later, when he reflected on his life, he explicitly says, I made mistakes, but I didn't deserve impeachment except Article 2 was right. I should never have ordered the CIA to spy. This was a violation of the fundamental principles of independent agencies. And yet, what we have today is President Trump unilaterally uh, eliminating USAID, uh, even though it was the appropriation of $2 billion was actually approved by Congress. So we have for this year, this fiscal year, and which and but he said, I'm not going to spend that money. So we have him doing two things in the short term, but in the longer term, Congress every year appropriates a suitable amount of money, but characteristically $2 billion by statute uh, to USAID. And when Congress appropriates money, it is not the President of the United States does not have the authority simply to say no. Indeed, there is a special provision which says if of the statute, which there will be passed, but is always passed, if the president believes that some of the money is that has been appropriated it no longer has a public function, then he shall inform Congress, uh, and uh, and if Congress agrees with him in 30 days, within the 30-day period, then he shall not spend the money. But if Congress doesn't, he must spend the money. So here we have this dramatic affirmation of this in one of the great struggles over the power of the presidency in the 20th century, the Richard Nixon Watergate embarrassment. Richard Nixon himself agreeing that this was the one real mistake he made. The others, Congress providing explicitly for reconsideration of appropriations. Meanwhile, the president refuses to spend the $2 billion. And as a consequence, throughout the world, millions of people are starving to death. Uh, uh, well, this is when the Supreme Court considers this case in the fall of 2025, and will undoubtedly deliberate, because as always, there are arguments on both sides. But the overwhelming fact of the matter is that this really not only challenges the status of USAID, but as I mentioned, central institutions of American policymaking of the 20th and 21st century, most notably the Federal Reserve, which we just saw the president asserting that the head of the Federal Reserve should resign before his time in office is expired, and then retreating when people were saying, well, really, especially given the implications of the tariff, which are threatening the centrality of the dollar in the world economy, it's unwise, and so he retreated. But a month from now, will he do it again? Uh, I don't know. But what I do know is that there are powerful interests, by which I don't mean narrow interest, powerful interests in thoughtful people on the of the traditional Republican Party, as well as powerful interests on the thoughtful people in the Democratic Party, that the independence of a whole range of agencies so is fundamental to the effective government of the United States in the 21st century.
Professor Ackerman, let's go back to the beginning. How did the founders originally envision the role of the president? And how did that balance of power between executive and Congress actually play out in practice during the early years of the Republic?
You see, this is excellent. So let me give you a little bit of number crunching history. When Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States, the number of people on his staff was two. 60, 70 years later, when the war hero Ulysses Grant, S. Grant, was the president, the number of people on his staff was three. When Teddy Roosevelt was president in 2001, with McKinley being assassinated in 2001, the number of people on his staff was six. So what this suggests is and I could elaborate at tedious length about this, that the president of the United States, except in extraordinary periods of war, like the Civil War or the Mexican War, was more like the president of Germany today. Uh, that is to say, the real leader of the national government was the Speaker of the House. Why the Speaker of the House? That was the only branch that was in which every district, every 10 years, was divided so that population would be the same. So this is direct electoral democracy. Then we have the check of the Senate. Until the 20th century, the Senate is selected by the members of the state legislature. Until 1824, there was no election at all. From 1824 to 1968, I'll just let's say until the ratification of the direct election of senators in 1909, the Senate was an indirect check. And the president was a doubly indirect check because, of course, the Electoral College give guarantees. Every state, like Delaware, let's say, to use Biden, is a teeny little state, is way overrepresented compared to California or Texas. And why was that so? Because Delaware was not going to sign on to the Constitution unless they were guaranteed that, and they needed to get them in there. We're not going to do it. So what I'm saying here is that was a perfectly plausible decision by the founders. You needed to get Delaware in there. If you didn't, you're not going to get 13 states. And there were other bargains, most notably the bargain with slavery. If you didn't guarantee slavery, you couldn't amend the Constitution, couldn't do anything to touch the slave trade for 25 years. It's there in Article 6, not one of your favorites. Uh, the that was you wouldn't be able to get them into the Union. And here was Spain, France, and Britain all wanting to destroy the Union. Not all, here's the British who are still in Canada, the Spanish who are in many of the islands and vast areas of the new Mexico, which was then California, etc., and so forth, and the French who are in on Quebec, and these people, all of them are trying to destroy the Union. So it was perfectly sensible to make these compromises, but we've moved from one generation to another.
As the country moved into the industrial era, it seems like the nature of government had to change. What pressures led to the creation of these independent agencies, and how did they reshape the relationship between expertise and executive power?
There are two ways that we have proceeded: sensible adaptation and strong change. Uh, and some of the time we've had uh, uh, um, sensible adaptation. And one of the key points in this dynamic of sensible adaptation occurs precisely 100 years after Philadelphia, uh, in the creation of the first independent agency, which is the Interstate Commerce Commission. What is the problem? The problem is there are now, the first industrial revolution is the problem. There are now farmers and workers and businessmen constructing things for shipping to mass markets. Uh, how are you going to get your cotton or your corn from Iowa to the consumers in New York City to eat it up? Answer: you ship it on the railroads. There are precisely four railroads that have national whips. What do these people, who are then called robber barons, do? They're not robber barons. They're doing precisely sensible profit maximization. They figure out the they rates to ship from Iowa to New York, which the Iowans have no choice but to accept. If they go lower, then the Iowans, or a substantial number, will say, "I'm not going to do corn. Forget about it." That's not in the interest of the railroads. So they maximize their profits by stripping all of the productive surplus in the rates. And the same thing is with businessmen. I'm producing shotguns, and I want to ship them across. In fact, New Haven is a center of shotgun production at the time. So I'm being a good congressman for New Haven. I want to ship them out to Texas, right? Once again, they're going to strip me of my monopoly, of my profits. Okay, says Grover Cleveland. This is unacceptable, but it isn't only because of Grover Cleveland, but there's this mass movement of mobilized farmers and workers and who are saying, we demand justice in rates, or in the statute, fair and reasonable rates. But the problem is that the courts, the judges, are incapable of figuring out what a fair and reasonable rate is. They don't know economics. They know a lot of things about the Constitution, statutes, but they don't know economics. Who is going to do it? Answer. The answer is the newly trained. 1886, a year before that, the American Economic Association is established because there are now people who are learning and teaching economics in universities. Okay, let's hire them as civil servants. The Civil Service Act is only passed 3 years before, but this is the first time we actually have civil servants who are selected on the basis of their merit, in this particular case, on the basis of their grades in these colleges and universities that are turning out economists. And what we're going to do is to have them have a lifelong job. So they can't be bought out, you see. Because after all, these robber barons, they're rich. Why don't you do us a favor? We'll give you $1 million, and you say that this is fair and reasonable. No, lifetime job. But they are supervised by members of the Interstate Commerce Commission, 5 of them at the time, but the numbers vary, who have 5-year terms that are staggered so that no president and Senate can confirm more than 2 of them. 5 years as opposed to 4 years. You see, and they serve for 5 years, and then the years change and all this. I'm just giving you the beginnings of this. So if you need 2/3 vote in the Senate, even if you control the Democrats or Republicans control Congress and the presidency, which doesn't always happen, to put it mildly, you're going to have to nominate a thoughtful person to serve as a member of this commission, because you need 2/3 votes. And indeed, the first chair of the Interstate Commerce Commission was a person who had formerly been the Chief Justice of the state of Michigan, I believe, for 20 years, and who had, and Cleveland, please come in here and legitimate this. That's what happens. Well, then what we have is every president from Teddy Roosevelt on doing this time and again.
Was there a particular turning point when the government started looking to economists and legal scholars and other citizens with specific expertise, but not just political appointees, for leadership?
Woodrow Wilson is the first person in the history of the United States to get a doctorate in law. Why did you get a doctorate? Because, I mean, in the 19th century, all you had to do was you argued in court, and if you did well, they made you a member of the bar. That's basically it. There were no bar exams. But he said, no, I'm not doing this. I'm going to get a doctorate. How did he get a doctorate? Because the Germans, who are the source of the modern science of law, politics, and economics, they have established after 1870, when they beat the French, Johns Hopkins University, which is a great university to this day, so that Americans could learn the German sciences. And Woodrow Wilson is the first person to gain a doctorate in law. He goes down to the South for a couple of years to practice law. He said, oh, this is crap. This is nothing like what I learned. What I learned was, how to draft statutes and frameworks. And then he goes back, and to make a very long story short, becomes president of the United States. in 1912, on a platform which had been reaffirmed by previous presidents, but he is self-conscious. He is the one who says, need a Federal Reserve Board. Why do we need a Federal Reserve Board? Because there was a stock market crash in 1905, and we have to have experts. They cannot be controlled by the sitting president. They are going to be, now there are 10 of them. But the numbers change. But the key thing is that no president can appoint more than one a year. That's just what Trump is trying to do.
One of the things it points out, you emphasized in the book, is originally the intention by staggering all of these terms was to prevent the country from swaying rapidly from one series of policies to another series of policies.
And
And
that's
that's
because there is a serious science. If you ask the members of the Federal Reserve Board, what do you think of John Maynard Keynes? Each of them has a response. And they're not all the same, but they're knowing what they're talking about. That's just what you want. And if John Maynard Keynes loses influence to a more rigorous micro and macroeconomic policy, and the profession of economics moves in that direction, then slowly so will the Federal Reserve. That's the idea. But here, in contrast, what we're seeing is an assault on the Federal Reserve because it is independent of the executive, and every institution that's charged with the task of implementing legislation must be governed by the president. That's the claim in the law. Of course, Donald Trump is saying many things, but that's the legal claim, and it requires the repudiation of 150 years of experience from 1887 through Woodrow Wilson, through the post-war era, you see, where after the Second World War, there are these two features. One is that during the Second World War, President Roosevelt was exercising extraordinary authoritative powers of unilateral decision, because we had to win the war. Don't give me this crap. Uh, the and then what was he doing? We were fighting Adolf Hitler. After the war, the question, very self-consciously elaborated during the Truman administration, and by Thomas Dewey, who is the new Republican person who says, no, we're not going to go back to Herbert Hoover. We're going to we want to have responsible uh, 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 regulatory government in the United States, and not. But both of them say, and we cannot afford Adolf Hitler. We just fought, and hundreds of thousands of Americans have died, so as to say we're not going to, against Hitler, we're not going to do that again. We have to have a responsible thing rather than allow the next president or the president after that to be a new dictator. And that made it really important that Dwight Eisenhower's role is underappreciated in our history.
why was he underappreciated? He seems to have been an understated and stabilizing president, but was the executive branch continuing its expansion during his 8-year term?
Here is a great war hero, the greatest war hero. without Eisenhower, would we have won? It's a fair question, and he knew it. He doesn't want to. What does he do when he comes back? People saying, "Run for president." We're gonna. We have. And look, these Dems have been winning and winning and winning. We have to. He becomes president of Columbia University. I no. He's like George Washington. No, you have to do it. You have to do it. He's like George Washington. Well, if you insist, I'll do it. Um, uh, and for 8 years, he is reaffirming the independent agencies in his environment and creating new ones. Uh, and so does every president after that until the last 10 years or so, when the status of the independent agency is being challenged, not only by Trump, but other people too. Trump isn't as extraordinary as one would think. But nonetheless, the challenge is now in the form of Trump, and the Supreme Court is going to confront it. Uh, uh, at a very distinctive time. Its decision is going to be terribly important uh, because we have, of course, some predictable, strong people who will repudiate the independent agency, most notably Clarence Thomas and one other. But the three Trump appointees, interestingly, are serious lawyers. I happen to know them personally in one way or another. They are serious people. I don't agree with them, but I'm not trying to convince you on this show that I'm right and they're wrong. But they are serious. And John Roberts uh, is has devoted his 25 years to being a centrist, to bring people and the different factions on the court together rather than apart. And Tony Barrett, the most recent nominee appointed, is also very seriously and thoughtfully involved. And here is this great test. I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do, of course, but the key question is if you are serious about trying to root our Constitution understandings of the 21st century in this historical development, uh, will you repudiate the last 150 years of historical development, which has demonstrated the legitimacy again and again by presidents and congresses of both parties of independent agencies, given the challenges of technocracy? That's really what the challenge is. The judges aren't technocrats. They should get in to review whether there's substantial evidence. Because, of course, there might be a power-hungry president who is going to try to push his people to do things that will be to the great disadvantage of his opposing party. That's a function that the courts can do, and in the Administrative Procedure Act, enacted in 1946, precisely to respond to this problem, the after a technocratic agency uh, issues its regulations, proposes its regulations, then the general public has to be given an opportunity to comment on them. Then the agency has to answer and explain why these comments, although it sound plausible, nonetheless, they're right, or they adapt their regulation. Then the regulations are challenged in the court system, and the courts use whether there's a reasonable relationship between the data and the conclusion, not that they can purport to be technocrats, but they can assess whether there is a reasonable relation. What reasonableness means, of course, has changed since 1946, one way or the other. The key point is that Trump has done none of this. And this is analytically independent of independent agencies. This is how can we legitimate regulation in a world in which we understand that expertise is real important without letting the experts run our country. Uh, an answer: pass statutes with announce principles. Uh, and this is then require agencies to justify their decisions in terms of principles, and then require the courts, or enable the courts to review whether there's a plausible relationship, and if there isn't, strike it down. So all of this structure is the background for your point about how has this been undermined over time? But maybe I've spoken too much already, so I don't want to.
Well, one of the enabling factors that allowed the executive branch to collect increasing amounts of power, according to what you wrote in your book, was the direct connection between the people and the president that didn't exist at the time of the writing of the Constitution, and therefore couldn't have really been envisioned very easily.
That's right.
Talk about the history of that and how that.
Well, the key, at the time of Thomas Jefferson, to go back, there were precisely 1,400 employees of the federal government. By far the largest number was the Postal Service. The Postmaster General is a member of the cabinet. Why? This is the only way you can communicate at a distance. The distinctive feature of the United States, as opposed to the French Revolution, which was much more central to the civilized world at that time than these people on a thin strip of the New World, the key feature in the United States was that everyone could read. Why? Because this was a Protestant country. What is it to be a Protestant? It is to go into church on Sunday and read the Bible in English. The Pope and his ministers and his cardinals all tell you what Church Latin means. Church Latin was codified, was entrenched in the 7th century AD. It was unintelligible to everyone, except a few. I mean, and this was really important. There are monasteries in Europe in which scholars, most notably, let's say, St. Thomas Aquinas, studied these manuscripts and then tried to reconcile St. Augustine with, and the Pope. Different popes over time decide whether Augustine or St. Thomas is correct and things of this kind. And this is perfectly plausible in a world in which almost no one could read. In the United States, this small country of 2 million people at the time of the initial census, who were whites and 1 million who were blacks, and the blacks were, slaves. And so they didn't count at all in the notorious compromises, which get the South in a necessary condition, but it's still, we shouldn't glamorize this. The But everyone could read, and as a consequence, that meant that the newspaper was of central importance in the United States long before everyone else. I have a chapter in my most recent book called The Most Postmodern Predicament, saying, called the printing press and the spirit of Protestantism. When Martin Luther famously put his piece of paper on the church door, no one could read it without the printing press, which was invented 80 years beforehand, you see, and so has already constructed the possibilities for communication, which both the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestants are exploiting. And this led to one of the most terrible periods of war in Europe for 150 years, until the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And the challenge for us today is whether the high-tech internet, which is also radically transforming our culture of communication, can be sustained and constrained in ways that don't shatter the sense of that we're all in it together. And for sure, one of the sources of our difficulty is just that.
The executive office of the president has grown dramatically far beyond what it was designed to be. Should the people in these powerful roles be subject to Senate confirmation in the same way cabinet secretaries are? And what risks do we run if they're not?
We also have I've told you that when the Act of 1939 establishing the office of the executive branch had 6 people in it with 7 other staffers, but they were today the office of the executive office of the presidency has 2,500, no, 2,000 staffers. Then the office OIRA, which is the Office of Regulation, basically, has another 500 that's part of the executive office, but it's distinct. And so we have at least 2,500. Then there's an Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, Office of Management and Budget, OMB, has another. How many people? I had it. I think maybe 250. Don't somehow I didn't put it down on my list. So that means we have 3,000 from 1939. And they are running a great deal of the government, and not the cabinet secretaries who have been confirmed by the Senate. So one crucial thing, if we get out of this crisis, is to really to require a Senate confirmation of leading members of the office of the executive office of the presidency, so that each president when each president comes in, he could fire anybody he wants from this thing, which is precisely what Trump is doing. Uh, uh,
Although I don't, yeah, I mean, it is a commonality of each of the presidencies as we go back
Yeah,
in history,
absolutely.
isn't it?
This is
Yeah,
not novel.
it's
That's
yeah, no, it's
precisely
not
the point.
unique.
This is this is also what Obama did. This is look. These are the people who I'm relying on. Of course, I'm going to ask for the resignation of everyone, and basically everyone resigns, and then they're replaced by people who are. Uh, 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 in think tanks in Washington D.C. So it would be interesting. I don't know to investigate. How many members of the one or another conservative think tank have now moved into uh, the executive office of the presidency. They have, they may well have had prior experience in previous presidencies.
I'm viewing uh, executive overreach creates dramatic reaction. It created dramatic reaction in each of the cases in the past. This has served to increase voter turnout, which many think is a very positive thing. I think that when Donald Trump has this great idea about tariffs and the stock market punishes owners and investors, that this serves as a somewhat of an institutional, albeit not human driven institution, but something of as a check on his ability to do
Absolutely.
these things.
This
And
is
I'm kind of wondering whether we aren't, if this damage were to expand to the economy and expand to other things, whether we don't see a pretty quick reaction and he loses either one or both houses of Congress, and that at that point are there ways that Congress, because you've explained how the judiciary branch has a number of moments coming up where they can validate kind of the origins of how we've gotten our government to look the way it is, even though the new executive doesn't like it. Um, and so I see a little bit how the judiciary may provide some checks. Our Congress has been really poor at retaining its powers, and the most important one is war and the just surrendering to the executive branch of all of the decisions that were supposed to be left close to home through the representatives in the House of Representatives. Isn't these aren't these swings likely to generate? I mean, I think wouldn't you only need a handful of the president's own party members to agree with the majority in restraining runaway policymaking that exceeds the executive's authority?
well, the first, just as a note, the Congressional Budget Office is already a technocratic component of Congress, which is indeed making disciplined assessments of whether the budget that is being proposed by the president is actually fiscally responsible. And so we already see the Congressional Budget Office saying, Mr. President, when you want to preserve your tax bill, which you managed in your first administration for the next 5 years, your estimates of the budgetary costs are not legitimate. And Congress and responsible Republicans as well as Democrats are saying, what's going on here? This is not acceptable. But on the war powers, we have, once again, Congress has already uh, done a good deal. And the question is, how do we reinvigorate it? The War Powers Act is a response to the Vietnam War of 1978, in which it explicitly says that the only occasion upon which the president can engage in a war is when there is, quote unquote, an imminent danger of invasion into the territory of the United States. The Moreover, when Ronald Reagan uh, 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 sends troops into Lebanon, the in 1982, uh, on the ground that there is an imminent danger or whatever. The provision of the War Powers Act says that 1/3 of the members of one or both houses of Congress can, if 1/3 makes this demand, uh, uh, the Congress shall immediately vote the next day on whether an emergency actually exists. And if they don't say yes, you have a fixed amount of days, the president, to withdraw, and Reagan withdrew the troops. So in the 80s, we still had respect for this. How is it that what happened that this is no longer a that's a question, and my simple answer, because we're I appreciate the amount of time we're spending. My simple answer is the fall of the Berlin Wall. Uh, Suddenly we are in a new world, uh, and the premises of the Cold War between the Americans and a much weaker, actually, Soviet army and military thing has fallen with the fall of the Berlin Wall. How are we going to reorganize uh, 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 our alliances with Europe, Asia, Latin America for this new world? And a critical test was Sarajevo. Uh, this was the first time President Clinton uh, 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 invaded, uh, with NATO forces, a country that has absolutely no threat to the United States. And indeed, in Germany, uh, there was a remarkable thing worthy of study where because their constitution is more recent than ours, in which members of the parliament petitioned immediately the constitutional court and demanded the question of whether Sarajevo wasn't a danger to Germany. And the Constitutional Court decided this case within 3 days, during which the German army did not go into Sarajevo. And then the German Constitutional Court said, yes, although this is not a danger to the United States, this is an imminent danger to Germany, which was a plausible decision. And then the Germans come in. But we don't have a mechanism like that that remains credible. We have it on the piece of paper. But then we have, of course, and I've wrote a series, alas, op-eds for the New York Times over from 2001 to 2010, with one of them, I think, had the headline, Osama bin Laden has won the war, because it has legitimated executive military. And we cannot forget that it was this every president since then. It isn't only Donald Trump, but Joe Biden using ignoring the War Powers Resolution, and which was bipartisan and by both sides, killed, assassinated the third leading the official in the Iranian government who was third in authority. That's like the Iranians murdering the Secretary of State, as it were, in the United States. And I thank you very much, Professor Ackerman, for these wonderful editorials in the New York Times. There's a whole list of things. Sometimes I've been influential, sometimes I haven't been. This is very high on the not having being influential list, but hopefully,
Well, it's very humble of you to blame yourself,
well, yes,
which isn't
but
deserved.
hopefully this conversation will provoke lots more conversation, and hopefully, because of the bottom up and top down factors, the consequences bottom up of unemployment and inflation mobilizing centrist voters to vote and to consider whether we're going down the right track, and presenting a decisive rejection of Trump's assertions of authority, plus the Constitutional Court, Supreme Court, coming down with a decision on independent agencies, plus a thoughtful reconsideration of lots of other policies, will prepare the way for reforms.
Yeah, I would just wish that the all of the decisions that a president is not allowed to make on their own be codified and supported by Congress.
Yes,
And
but
I would be very happy with that because
this is
we would.
unrealistic, you see, because no president can do all the coordinating work uh, of the modern state. We need an executive office of the president, but its leaders have to be confirmed by the Senate. Uh, because the president of the United States is the person, not the Speaker of the House, uh, 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 who has to engage in this coordination. How are we going to balance off our initiatives in Latin America against our initiatives in Asia when we have a fixed amount of resources to go around? The key thing is they have to approve of the members of the office of the executive office of the presidency. What is a president sits down and is briefed by crucial people in the White House about, hey, we have this problem of China. What are the alternatives? What, et cetera, and so forth. And he has to understand the alternatives. Meanwhile, he is going to try to enact legislation, if the legislation isn't adequate, with Congress, and they have the capacities to respond to that by hiring other experts.
I understand. I also liked your idea of deliberation day.
Yes,
Let's
yes.
just take 2 seconds on that.
Sure. Well, really, it's James Fishkin and the center and his center at Stanford and I have engaged in a collaborative effort for 30 years. And Fishkin has I'm the kibitzer and he's the real source, but we collaborate a lot. And Fishkin, we you know does the following. There's a big issue before the public in one or another country. Shall Japan become a nuclear power, or shall in India or in the United States, what about subsidies to the University of Texas based on, just their host of issues at different levels. And what he does is take a statistically significant sample by income, race, you name it, demographics, and invites them to spend a weekend deliberating on the issue. Before they arrive, they report their positions. Roughly, left is, let's say, 1, and right is 5, and 3 is centrist, et cetera, and so forth. And in almost every case, except for Switzerland, except for the Scandinavian countries, at least 10% of the population, after spending a day deliberating on the issues in a very structured way, which we can't get into, at least 10% have changed their minds from left. They came in a lefty and they come out a righty, or vice versa.
I imagine there's also
Great. If we had deliberation day 3 weeks before the election, which is cheap and easy, especially with the internet to do, that means if there are 150 million voters, that's 15 million people. There are 120, 12 million people that who swing not necessarily to the left.
no, even just moderating your views, which is what I think that you'd have an even better.
Have an audience of highly educated people who will then discuss things over the dinner tables, just as there is this crucial event, election day, 3 weeks ahead of time. And the way we can really save money is to, because the real thing is, do you have to take a new day off to do this? So the real crucial proposal is to shift President's Day to 3 weeks before the election.
Election day, you mean?
No, President's Day.
President's Day.
How do we celebrate President's Day nowadays? We go and get a sale. No, I can assure you, I have talked to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and they support Deliberation Day. It's grotesque that's how we celebrate President's Day. So we shift it one day so we don't lose a day's work. You see, that means the real cost is that people get an extra day off a year in the economy, you see. And we don't only do Deliberation Day for president, we do it for the off-year election. And then we allow each state to do Deliberation Day on a key election, or each city to do in the other 2 years.
Well, and circling back to your original point, it would leverage this educational foundation base that we have that's so extraordinary.
That's right. And that's completely right. We have an informed public, but they're being bombarded by big lies on the left and the right. And the newspaper has been destroyed by the internet. And here we have the internet can be used to operate very effectively to encourage people to tune in and hear the debates and participate in the debates in ways described in the book.
Well, that's one of a number of remedies that may lie ahead, and we will keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, I hope so. Yes.
Professor Ackerman, thank you so much for all your time today on this really important issue. Thank you. Hey, if you like this clip, please hit the subscribe button. You might also want to check out some of the clips I've posted with my many other guests. My interviews all address the simple question, how screwed are we? We ask experts about the problems that make Americans so pessimistic today, but we also explore why there's never been a better time to have been born than today. Join us for perspective on today's challenges and opportunities.